Today on Inside Utah Politics, the primary election. We're breaking down the biggest races, how they're playing out, and why. Plus, a look ahead to some of the general election matchups in November. Plus, NAFTA is no more. The new trade agreement between the United States, Canada, and Mexico taking effect during the week. We're looking into the economic impact and why some say the timing couldn't be better.
Time now for Inside Utah Politics.
Thanks so much for joining us. I'm Glenn Mills. It is time to go inside Utah politics. We begin with the primary election results. State Representative Brian King and State Senator Todd Weiler are here with analysis on what happened. Gentlemen, great to have you with us. Thanks for being here.
Thanks, Glenn. Good morning.
Let's jump into the big race, the big ticket, really, the Republican gubernatorial primary. Let's jump into your analysis of what you saw play out in this race. Senator, let's start with you on that one.
Well, thanks. I think we saw, with very few exceptions, the incumbents win. Spencer Cox was treated like an incumbent during the gubernatorial race. We had a few incumbents lose, notably Lyle Hillyard and Val Potter, both in Cache County. And Kevin Stratton is only up by 67 votes. He's a representative from Utah County. But other than that, pretty much all the incumbents won. We saw a few incumbent county commissioners like Nathan Ivey and Max Burdick in Utah County and Salt Lake County, respectively. But overall, it was a good night for the incumbents. And, Glenn, if I can, in the two open congressional races for the Republicans, we saw the former legislators lose. Kim Coleman lost big to Burgess Owen, and Kerry Gibson lost big to newcomer Blake Moore. Yeah,
we're going to dig into that a little bit more in the next segment. Representative, let's bring you in. What did you make of the Republican gubernatorial primary?
Well, I think the thing that was really remarkable was the number of people that came out and voted. Of course, there was a big push to have people who were unaffiliated with the Republican Party switch over and become registered Republicans. That was tactical in large part. There were people who felt that that was the only way that they could have a voice in this election. I object to that idea because the general election in November is going to be a ballot that is well contested. We've got the Democrats have a great candidate in the form of Chris Peterson, who's running for governor. So it's not over yet, especially in a year when Donald Trump is at the top of the ticket and there are going to be plenty of Utahns who are voting against Donald Trump.
Let's talk a little bit more about that turnout. 480,869 votes in the gubernatorial primary on the Republican side. We're getting to territory where that will double 2016. Why was there so much interest in this race?
One was vote by mail. We didn't have wide vote by mail in 2016. But number two, Glenn, is this is the first open seat for governor that we've had in 16 years. And so I think a lot of people, including some Democrats, wanted to have a say in who that was going to be.
Yeah, Representative, we estimate somewhere around 10,000 Democrats may have jumped over, a lot more unaffiliated. Why so much interest?
Oh, I just think that you did have four really high-quality candidates from many perspectives, and they represented a diverse set of views in terms of their approach to governing in Utah. I think that you had people that were running that had great qualifications in terms of their background and their history, that held a variety of offices. Of course, former Governor Huntsman has great experience as an ambassador. It was a remarkable group of people, and so I think that that was another part of the reason that people wanted to have their say, is not just that the feeling that this is the election for governor because it is the Republican primary, but because you had some really well-qualified people, uniquely qualified people in a variety of different ways.
Okay, so as of recording time, there had been no concessions other than from Hughes and Wright. When you take a look at the numbers, let's break it down. Senator, start with you.
Well, there's about 50,000 uncounted votes. We know that about 30% of those will go to Hughes and Wright, so that leaves about 35,000. Huntsman's down by about 10,000. It's statistically possible, but very, very unlikely that he can make up 10,000 with 35,000 votes left. He would have to get about 66%, and he's been getting about 34%. So,
Representative, other than the fact this is 2020 and it's the most unconventional year that we've probably experienced in our lifetimes, is that going to happen?
Well, it depends on where the votes are coming from. If the votes all came from Salt Lake County, John Huntsman might have a better shot. But in fact, even if most of them are coming from Salt Lake County, and most of them are, there's still enough votes that are coming from outside Salt Lake County that suggest to me that he's going to have a very steep hill to climb in order to close that gap. It's possible. I don't think anybody thinks it's likely.
Let's talk about some of the dynamics. One of the more interesting ones I saw play out in this race is we saw in one poll for sure done by Dan Jones, I believe Y2 Analytics did one as well, where they set up the race for governor by asking this question: who do you trust more in a time of pandemic to lead the state? In that question, former Governor Huntsman was hands down the winner. You know, more people saying they trusted him. However, when you got into the race for governor, it was very tight and close. What do you make of that dynamic there?
Well, Glenn, what I make, if this primary had been in March or even April, Huntsman, I think that would have helped Huntsman. But I think a lot of people, we have a lot more data about the pandemic, and I'm not trying to downplay it, but most people aren't living in fear. They know what they need to do to protect themselves, and they know which populations are the most vulnerable. So I don't think that this was clearly a pandemic-driven vote. It would have been 3 months ago.
I actually disagree with that. I think that you did see a movement toward Governor Huntsman in the last 2 or 3 weeks because people began to see that our response to the pandemic here in Utah, although it was very good in March, April, and early May, since this reopening, it's been a rough reopening. We have not had the kind of success in reopening in terms of keeping the transmission rates down that we would like to have seen. And I think that that moved the needle back toward Governor Huntsman and away from Spencer Cox, simply because Spencer Cox was the head of the coronavirus task force, and he had remained relatively silent the last few weeks about that. And so I think people were looking at him saying, hey, how come this task force that you're heading up has not been going as smoothly in terms of a good reopening as we had hoped?
Well, Glenn, if I could just jump on, the point of the shutdown was to not overwhelm the hospitals. Our hospitals in Utah are doing very, very well. The point was never to stay home forever, so nobody would ever be exposed. What we have in Utah is a much younger population being exposed, and our death rate is way below New York and so many other parts of the country.
Senator, let me ask you this one thing, though, because Republicans, you know, one of the key values is to be a good steward over the way the state is spending money. And we did have instances in the response where even the governor and the lieutenant governor admitted we made a mistake and it was costly.
Yeah.
But Republicans didn't seem to hold them accountable for that.
Well, I think that Republicans recognize that in just a 2 or 3 week period, our governor and lieutenant governor and the task force, they were trying to acquire as much PPE as they could. Our normal procurement process, Glenn, would take 3 to 4 months. We didn't have 3 to 4 months back in March. And so when you're desperate to acquire that stuff as quickly as possible, some mistakes were made, and you know what? We're going to learn from those mistakes.
Representative, any thoughts on that? Because, you know, the minority body was really outspoken on this. We talk about the purchase of the hydroxychloroquine, which was later refunded, the tracing app that isn't tracing. Your thoughts on that?
Well, that's right. I mean, we started out well in March and April. There were some problems with the procurement. The HCQ, the hydroxychloroquine, was not a good thing. Obviously, we walked that back when the information became available as to the fact that it was not an adequate treatment, and that was a good thing. But there really wasn't a lot of accountability there, and we still don't have a good tracing app. We still don't have the testing that we need. And one of the things that we've been hearing from Dr. Dunn, Angela Dunn, is we need to do a much better job. I do think that that was one of the things that pushed the needle back toward Governor Huntsman, but the reality is we need to do a much better job than we are. We've been patting ourselves too aggressively on the back. And we've actually been reflecting some of the negative trends across the entire country and seeing increasing rates of transmission. We're never going to have a successful reopening if we keep putting as a priority business over public health considerations.
Real quick, I want to touch on some of the congressional races. What are the big storylines you're seeing come from the congressional side, Senator?
Well, the biggest surprise, I think, for everyone on election night was Blake Moore, who literally came out of nowhere, won the 1st congressional district primary, and that's an R+26 district. So he has almost zero chance of losing in November. Who is Blake Moore? Nobody really knows. But I mean, hats off to him. He filed really late, Glenn. He didn't collect signatures. No one expected him to come out of convention. He finished 2nd at convention. Everyone that I know, everyone thought that Bob Stevenson, the mayor of Layton, would win that race. And Blake Moore, he's up by 2,700 votes, and there's not enough votes for anybody to come back.
He clearly had money behind him because he was building his name ID more than any other candidate in that race. As far
and he
as
married into the Boyer family, and that doesn't hurt him either. So.
Gotcha. All right, Representative, let's talk about the 4th. We'll now see Burgess Owens in a matchup with Representative Ben McAdams. What do you make of that? Well,
and that was the surprise to me, is how convincingly Burgess Owens won. He trounced his opponents, and I was surprised at that. He had a heavy advertising presence. There were a lot of ads on the television, and that actually I attribute Blake Moore's success to having a significant television presence in terms of his advertising there. So, you know, I think that it's going to be a very interesting race in CD4 with Owens against McAdams. I think that in this year, with Donald Trump at the top of the ticket for the Republicans, Ben McAdams is going to have a fight because it's a very closely balanced district. But I think in the end, he's going to be okay. He's done a good job. That
one will definitely draw attention from national perspective, no doubt about that. All right, gentlemen, stick around. We're going to take a break real quick, but still to come, we'll check back in with you because we're sticking with the primary election. Some big storylines with the Utah legislature, as Senator Weiler already hit on. We'll get more into that after the break. Plus, college athletes are getting closer to being able to get paid. What Congress is doing to keep it in check a little later. Welcome back. We continue our breakdown of the primary election with a look at some of the local races. We welcome back State Senator Todd Weiler and Representative Brian King. Gentlemen, let's get into your ground up at the state capitol and talk about some of the storylines that we saw play out in the House and Senate. Senator, let's start with you, a longtime colleague getting the boot.
Yeah, Senator Lyle Hillyard, he's been in the Senate, he's been in the legislature since 1981, so 40 years. And you know, he's really a wealth of knowledge and wisdom, and I'm going to miss working with him. But I do think, I mean, he chaired the committee on the tax reform that recommended the restoration of the sales tax on food, and I think that with some local activists, including the county Republican leaders, campaigning against him, that and his longevity probably worked against him. He also had a great opponent, and he hadn't really been challenged in about 2 decades. Unfortunately, I think some of that negativity also carried over to Val Potter, who is an excellent member of the House from Cache County. He also lost, and those were the only 2 incumbents that lost on election night last Tuesday.
Representative, some of your colleagues in the House, even though they didn't lose necessarily, I mean, there's still votes to come in, but really tight races.
Yeah.
Break that down for us.
Well, Kevin Stratton, who is down in Utah County, is in a tight race. He's ahead, as the senator mentioned, just by double digits. I mean, he's like 60 votes ahead. I think in the end he'll probably hang on. But there were several primary races down in Utah County. There were several in Salt Lake County. You had a loss that I was surprised with by Val Potter up in Cache County. Representative Potter served as a mayor up there, as a city councilor, as a county councilor. He was well respected, well liked in the legislature. It was surprising to me to see him not come through his primary, and I think that Todd's probably correct that there was some spillover on Senator Hillyard. I was surprised to see Senator Hillyard go down, but I do think it was that tax reform issue. That, and he'd been up there serving the legislature for so long, I think some people thought, you know, you've had your time, let's give someone else a chance.
Yeah, Senator, weigh in on that, because he had been there a long time, longer than some legislators are old. So talk about, did there just come a point where, you know, his constituents said, we need fresh blood in there?
Well, his opponent, Chris Wilson, owns a car dealership up there. Someone made the comment to me that almost every family in Lyle's district owns a Ford truck, and most of them bought them from Chris Wilson. So I think Chris was a strong candidate, and I think when the voters saw a strong candidate and they realized that Lyle had been there for 40 years, they were ready for a change. One race that Brian didn't, or Representative King didn't mention, was Brad Last, who chairs the Appropriations Committee in the House, the head budget committee. He almost lost to Willie Billings. Votes are still coming in, but it looks like in a very close race that Representative Last will hold on as well.
And that's the tax reform angle again, I think, to some extent.
Does it go beyond that, though? Because we also saw a couple of referendums on both medical marijuana and Medicaid expansion. You all know the legislature modified those as well.
Yeah, I didn't feel that. I mean, I'm up for re-election this year, Brian is. I think that those had kind of run their course because they they were a little bit, those were 2018 changes instead of 2019 changes. I do think the tax reform was a factor. Lincoln Fillmore held on, a senator, against Rich Cunningham, and I think tax reform was an issue in that. He was on the committee, but it looks like he's going to hold on as well.
Representative, your thoughts on the other referendums that were modified by the legislature?
Well, I do think that they're fading in so many people's minds, but Medicaid expansion is something that I think is still a current issue in this sense. We've got an Attorney General, Sean Reyes, who is working along with the Trump administration to have the Supreme Court declare that it's unconstitutional. That's not a good thing in my mind to be doing in the middle of a pandemic, and I think that it's on challengers who want to make an issue of that to raise it in the minds of voters and raise their consciousness of it. If they don't do that, shame on them. I mean, you got to run a good campaign that brings to mind in people's hearts what it is what's at issue here in this election. So you have to be talking about things that they care about. I think health care is certainly one of the things that they do care about.
Do either of the two of you even have an opponent going into the general election?
I don't. I had one, but I was able to escape convention and eliminate my opponent, so I don't have one.
I do have an opponent, and she's very well qualified, and I'm going to be working hard to make sure that the people in House District 28, that I earn their vote.
Okay, let's talk about this turnover. You mentioned, actually, let's get more into that because pretty big numbers lately have been not even filing for re-election. We saw that both in the Senate and the House.
Yeah, we had 14 legislators who chose not to file for re-election. One of them, of course, was Deidre Henderson, who may be our next lieutenant governor. But even Tim Quinn, a representative of the House who's only been in there for 4 years, he co-chaired the Tax Reform Committee with Lyle Hillyard. He did not file for re-election. And a couple prominent Democrats like Representative Patrice Arent are retiring. Susan Duckworth, Representative Marie Polson. We're going to miss these people, and I like to point out, Glenn, as you know, Republicans and Democrats in the Utah legislature, we're pretty good friends. We're not like Congress. We work together a lot. So,
Brian, your thoughts on your colleagues that just decided it's time to move on their own?
Well, it's true. I mean, we talk about term limits, and there may be situations where term limits are necessary, but as a practical matter, what you see in the Utah State Legislature is a pretty good turnover. I think that of the 75 members of the House, we're likely to have over 25 new faces come January of 2021. Partly that's due to retirement, partly that's due to incumbents losing, whether it's in the primary or whether it's in a general election. So what you see in Utah is Greg Hughes and I talked about this when he was leaving the legislature, and he said, actually, this is so time-consuming and hard on people because we are a part-time legislature. It's much more difficult for people to feel good about spending time as a career member of the legislature in Utah because they have other lives that they have to live, and it's a hard thing to keep all those balls in the air.
We've seen quite a bit lately, your colleagues, when they do decide to move on from the state Senate or House, make a run for the U.S. House of Representatives or the U.S. Senate, and they're not doing so with success. Why is that?
Well, I think it's because as a legislator, I have to vote on about 1,000 issues every session. And so I've had 8 sessions, 9 sessions, I guess. And so that's 9,000 votes. So it's pretty easy for an opponent to comb through my record and find a vote here or there to vilify me. You take someone like Blake Moore or even Chris Stewart 8 years ago, who's never taken a vote ever. And it's easy for them to kind of appear to the voters to be all things to all people, and Mia Love was another example. So Ben McAdams was in the legislature, Rob Bishop was in the legislature. Those are the only 2 legislators who have been elected to federal office in Utah in the last 20 years.
Yeah, and you've seen a bunch step up and try to do so. Representative, your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think one of the things that incumbent legislators overestimate is the degree to which people know who they are and recognize them. The reality is we're not well known. I mean, when I go to my grocery store in my district, I'll bet you on any given day maybe 5% of the people know who I am. This is work that's done behind the scenes for the most part. It's important work, it's critical work, it's work that affects the lives of Utahns, as Senator Weiler said. It's work where we develop relationships, we get along well with each other, but it's pretty inside baseball. And if you really want to step up and run for Congress, you're going to have to adopt a completely different game plan. You're going to have to spend significant money. You're going to have grassroots support. You're going to have high-profile endorsements. You're going to have to basically start as any other candidate would. And I think that incumbent legislators overestimate the degree to which they have an advantage, quite honestly.
Glenn, I remember Rob Bishop in 2002 saying to me, I've been Speaker of the House and I've been Chair of the Republican Party, and 60% of the delegates don't know who I am.
Yeah.
So.
Okay. And as you mentioned, you have a record that a potential opponent down the road can point to. Gentlemen, thanks so much for helping us make sense of this primary election. I appreciate your time.
You bet.
Thanks, Glenn.
Still to come, President Trump and Congress worked together on a new trade deal, and it went into effect during the week. We'll get into that after the break. Stay with us. It's official. The United States-Mexico-Canada trade deal took effect during the week, replacing NAFTA as the trade agreement between the three countries. The White House says the deal is expected to boost the economy and couldn't come at a better time. Washington correspondent Anna Wernicke reports.
U.S. Trade Representative Robert Lighthizer says after 3 years of negotiating and renegotiating with Canada and Mexico, they finally found a deal everyone agreed to.
It was a tough negotiation. We ended up with a fantastic deal.
The USMCA trade deal, which replaces NAFTA, is expected to generate more trade between the three countries, create more jobs, and boost the U.S. economy.
You're going to see new access on dairy products into Canada. You're going to see our wheat graded properly. You're going to see new rules of origin on automobiles with both Mexico and Canada.
Replacing NAFTA was one of President Trump's top campaign promises, and Lighthizer says the deal couldn't come at a better time.
Hopefully it'll help get us past this pandemic and the economic problems that have gone with it.
Treasury Department spokesperson Monica Crowley says the deal will bring much needed certainty to American farmers and workers as they cope with the ongoing pandemic.
It's been estimated that USMCA will generate upwards of $235 billion to the American GDP and upwards of about 500,000 new jobs for American workers.
But Texas Democratic Congressman Henry Cuellar says the work isn't done yet.
Now we have to look at the details, the rules to implement.
Cuellar says he is working with Mexican officials to make sure the rules and obligations the three countries agreed to are enforced. In Washington, I'm Anna Wernicke.
College athletes will soon be able to make money off their name, image, and likeness after the NCAA signaled earlier this year it was open to athletes making money from endorsements. Now Congress wants to make sure there's one system in place to keep things fair. Washington correspondent Trevor Shirley explains.
More states are passing laws to regulate how college athletes can make money while at school.
Is there anybody here on the panel that does not believe that there is a need for a nationwide standard?
South Dakota Senator John Thune got no disagreement from senators or college sports experts at a Senate hearing on the issue. Connecticut Senator Richard Blumenthal says if Congress does get involved,
the question for us is how do we protect the athletes?
Even though the NCAA decided it will allow college athletes to make money from endorsement deals, SEC Commissioner Greg Sankey told senators he worries about the NCAA going pro.
We must not allow college athletics to devolve into a pay-for-play system.
And Thune worried about the impact on which schools athletes choose to attend.
If this becomes a money issue, how that could impact that recruiting process.
But Dion Collar, director of the Center for Sport and the Law, told senators she is concerned the NCAA will put its own best interests above its athletes.
Rather than seeking protection from Congress to impose economic restraints on athletes, the NCAA should craft rules that better support athletes' health, safety, and well-being.
This is at least the second time senators have explored the issue, but there's no consensus on when legislation might get a vote. Reporting in Washington, I'm Trevor Shirley.
Stay with us. We'll have more Inside Utah Politics right after the break. We leave you now with a look at what's on the radar in the world of politics. The next election update comes tomorrow at 3 p.m. The final canvassing deadline is Tuesday, June 21st. Then we'll turn our attention to the general election, which is set for Tuesday, November 3rd. Make sure to connect with me on social media. I'd like to know what you think of this show and other issues that are important to you. You can email me at InsideUtahPolitics@abc4.com. You can also follow me on Twitter and Facebook. Just log on and search Glenn Mills ABC4. Thanks so much for making us part of your day. We hope to see you again next week as we go inside Utah politics.